Hello, and today I'm going to tell you a story of two very good friends who had decided to go on a scuba diving expedition to retrieve a body that had been lost for many years. Their names were Don Shirley and Dave Shaw. They were on a mission to retrieve a body of a fellow scuba diver who had been lost at sea. Their mission required them to travel 1,000 feet below into the deep sea. More people have walked on the moon than have traveled to such depths. The location of their expedition was in Bushman's Cave in South Africa. Dave Shaw was the first one to go down. He was able to reach the incredible depth and actually located the body of Dion Dreyer, the fellow scuba diver that had gone missing mysteriously. Dave resurfaced and told Don about what he had found and that they were going to travel back down to retrieve the body. The expedition was going to be a group effort, but Don decided that he would travel down about 14 minutes prior to Dave's descent. Unfortunately, this was the last time Don was seen. Shortly thereafter, Dave began his descent, but very unfortunately, he dropped his flashlight, which was his only source of light. In such a depth like this, Dave was in complete darkness. At this point, he had no idea which way was up, down. He had no sense of direction. At this point, black was all he could see. Another unfortunate happening, there was a malfunction with his gas tank, and he had received too much helium, which resulted in helium poisoning. Helium poisoning can lead to disorientation, vomiting, illness, and at points loss of consciousness, which all happened to Dave. By the grace of God, Dave was able to finally get himself upright, but he couldn't ascend to the surface because the water pressure was too great and he would get the bends. The bends refers to having too much oxygen in your blood and can be life-threatening. After his long 10-hour ascent, he was finally able to make it to the boat. Unfortunately, Don never resurfaced, and it is assumed that he was caught in one of the guidelines and was unable to resurface and died down at sea. Don was a beloved husband and father, and was mourned greatly and dearly by his family and those who loved him. These men were professionals, and yet they were still greatly affected by tragedy and their lack of safety during diving. These men were professional scuba divers, and yet they were still afflicted by the dangers of scuba diving, just like anyone else who decided to partake in the activity. Because of this, I'm here to remind you of the safety precautions that are put in place in order to keep our family and friends safe.
Hi there, my name is Christiana Camp, and my safety topic for this semester, as you could probably tell by my PSA, is scuba diving safety. Now, I'd like to just begin by saying that I understand that scuba diving obviously is not often associated with safety. When we think of safety, we think of car safety, fire safety. Those are the ones that come to mind. Scuba diving safety is a bit unique, and that's actually why I picked it. So I'd just like to start by talking about why people go scuba diving in the first place. What is the draw? So oftentimes it's a recreational activity to explore the sea below, and it can be a lot of fun. When I was a bit younger, I was 16 years old, I actually went on a cruise, and one of the excursions was scuba diving. Luckily, it went completely according to plan, but I was also under the supervision of a scuba diving instructor, which was really integral to that, so that me and my family and everyone else on the boat knew what to do, how to use the equipment properly, and how to follow a specific protocol to ensure our safety. Also, scuba diving is used for science and also commercial business. So it's still very relevant in our society and used to explore and discover new things. So just to put the risk into safety, out of every 10,000 dives, 16.4 result in a death of a diver. So not a huge number, not incredibly significant, but again, I think these deaths are very unnecessary, considering that our technology is definitely in a good place to keep us safe when we dive, but oftentimes it's human error that leads to these accidents. For example, I'll give you a couple of the most common reasons that people are either injured or die during a dive. The first one is poor gas management, poor buoyancy control, equipment misuse, entrapment, rough water conditions, or the most frequently occurring is pre-existing health problems. A couple more stats I'd like to run by you just so you can get a feel. 86% of diving deaths were scuba divers who were diving alone. So they didn't use the buddy system, as I had mentioned in the PSA. Another stat, 50% did not inflate their buoyancy compensators. So there's a misuse of equipment. And 50% died at the surface, which addresses a lot of the issues with making sure that your buoyancy and your water pressure is carefully monitored so that when you come to the surface while you're diving, there's not a problem with that, because that can result in death as well due to the change in pressure. And finally, 10% of scuba diving deaths had the diver informed pre-dive that they were not physically fit, in their opinion, for a dive. Now, obviously, death brings tragedy and sadness, but it also has a significant economic effect. For example, a death during scuba diving can result in lost income and lost business. Insurance rates are likely to go up, and there's also legal costs involved. So if people don't think that the death statistics are relevant, the economic ones are pretty astounding and worthy of our attention. So what I really want you to take away from this public service announcement is, yes, the technology has become more advanced, and we are beginning to know more and more about the deep sea and what it holds. And it's a fun recreational activity that people love to participate in, but it's also an opportunity for science and commercial business to expand. With that said, there are still safety precautions that need to be followed strictly and reinforced more, because we still see accidents happening, completely avoidable, and we have the tools to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And that's really what my public service announcement was about, was bringing a spotlight to something that a lot of people don't talk about. Next, I want to talk to you about the 5 E's: engineering, enforcement, education, economic incentives, and finally, emergency response, and how they apply to scuba diving.
So the first one is engineering, and that refers to the tools we have in order to make scuba diving as safe as possible. So to name a few, we have the wetsuit that regulates body temperature, the BC backpack, which holds the gas tank and regulators that convert high pressure oxygen to breathable air so that we can be under the water longer. We expect the technology to further over the coming years. The next E stands for enforcement. Now, this refers to the laws and regulations that are put in place in order to ensure the safety of divers. Now, in the U.S., there is no simple rule. It often depends on where you are, how offshore you are, and whether you're diving from a boat. Moreover, it's often not easy to find the law that applies to you. The first place you're going to want to look is the rules that govern boating, often published by the State Department of Natural Resources. Now, there are some laws that are federally mandated. For example, employers engaged in scuba diving should not exceed depths more than 130 feet of seawater. And if they decide to go more than 100 feet, they need a decompression chamber to use. Next, we have education. There are many different classes that one can participate in. For example, the NAUI Scuba Diver Certification Card is an accomplishment for which you will rightfully feel proud, and you will be ready to begin a lifetime of underwater adventures and discovering. The NAUI also has a couple stipulations, and they require the trainees to be at least 15 years old with a minimum of 25 open water scuba dives. Depending on how autonomous you want to be in your diving, whether you want to be taught in a group or be taught so that you can practice on your own, then you might want to take a different instruction course, some are less in-depth, some are more in-depth, depending on what you need in order to make sure you are safe, whether you are diving alone or with others or in groups or not. The fourth E is economic incentives. Now, unfortunately, in scuba diving, this doesn't really apply and isn't often seen. And the final E stands for emergency response. Now, something very important to understand about scuba diving is, yes, we have access to the Coast Guard and medical services that can help those in need, but most problems that occur under sea level can only be resolved by the diver. And that's why we have to make sure that they are well educated and well equipped to handle situations like a gas tank malfunction or something of that nature. If you wish to further your education on scuba diving, feel free to visit one of these 3 sites. They provide information on what scuba diving is, where you can get educated, and where you can even find gear. I would like to thank you all for taking time out of your day to listen to this video and become more educated. I would like to leave you with this one thought, and that is to scuba safe and dive deep. Thank you very much.